As promised, how to parent a sensitive child. Welcome back, and if you're new here and you want to learn about how to better manage things like anxiety, how to make being a sensitive person a superpower, and just all around dealing with your emotions and feelings, then please make sure you've subscribed and turned on the notifications so you know each and every time I post a video. And for those of you that have been around for a while, you'll recognize that today I am packing a new microphone. I'm committed to really improving my content over the next year, as we move into 2020, things like this and lots of other stuff that I'm planning along with some podcasts and loads of different things are all going to help better improve the content experience. So I have more than one sensitive child when it comes to parenting sensitive children. As a father of 6, the law of averages would say that I have got one, but I've very obviously got a couple now. The one I want to discuss today, my son, who is highly sensitive, I kind of felt like I was struggling with our relationship for a long time, and I didn't know where it was coming from or why it was happening. Initially, I wasn't even open to the sensitivity. It wasn't even something that I had recognized. It wasn't something that I was picking up. But I guess as I did start to pick it up, as I started to notice it, I placed kind of concerns on it. I created narratives like we always do to kind of justify the way that our relationship had gone. But I found myself finding it harder and harder and harder to manage, develop, and be in our relationship. And as difficult as it is to say, for a while it did feel like it had become the bane of my life. And what I didn't really recognize is that I was portraying lots of my own stuff onto my son. I think if you're parenting a sensitive child and you're finding it particularly difficult, then here's the big home truth. We need to start looking at ourselves. For me, things really, really changed in our relationship when one night I was speaking to my wife about the relationship, and I was kind of saying, I don't know where I'm going to go from here. I don't know what to do. It felt like it had been a particularly bad day. And my wife looked me straight in the eye and said very clearly, he's not the problem. The problem is you. And the moment she said that, I knew she was right. And from there on, I made the very conscious decision to adjust myself and start to look at myself and what it was about me and what parts of me were being disturbed and causing difficulty in the relationship. And so from there, literally overnight, the relationship changed. I started becoming very conscious and mindful of what was happening. And what I realized is, and people would have heard me say this in previous videos when I'm talking about sensitivity, is that my son isn't too sensitive. He doesn't have a problem with sensitivity. I couldn't handle the way I felt when I sensed his sensitivity. And so what was happening was, as we were approaching life together within our relationship, he was overwhelmed by the same things that would overwhelm me. Now, when I'm not conscious of that, what that means is that when we're both overwhelmed, I don't have the space to go and meet him and to help him soothe himself through what he's experiencing. And so when we're both just in this overwhelmed state, I can't be there for him. And he recognizes that, he senses that, his gut feeling and his intuition will tell him that. And yet I will try to suppress it because I'm not yet ready to look at it. Of course, when you add in there to the fact that over the last few years, I've been working on finding ways to be able to soothe myself, right? So how can I teach him if I don't even know myself? And so what I was doing is like the parts of myself and the places that I didn't want to go, so the parts of myself that I was suppressing as a result of that, I would then suppress in my son and not want my son to go there. And so what was happening is I was almost micromanaging his feelings and his senses to make sure that he didn't take us to the difficult places that I didn't want to go. I wasn't consciously aware of this, and my son wouldn't have been able to articulate it, but he would have known and had that feeling and that sense that I was somehow battling and trying to push down and trying to overmanage him. And what you'd recognize and what you'd see actually is that, metaphorically speaking, I was approaching the relationship with him like this all the time, yeah? Metaphorically speaking, just waiting for it to go off. And so, of course, my son was sensing that. And how was he approaching the relationship between the two of us? He was doing the same thing, right? He's approaching like that. And we're just both just waiting for when it goes off. And then we're reacting in survival mode in the relationship rather than being able to explore that. So what's changed and what's now made me and him be as close as we are is that I make sure that I check myself. I be conscious and as mindful as often as I can. Let me give you an example. We were once at a place called Lydiard Park near where I live very, very recently actually. And my youngest daughter like fell in the little shallow part of like, there's a lake there. But of course she went in head first because she was trying to get something out of there, right? But when she went in, it sends my body into overdrive, right? Because I'm sensitive and I'm straight away like saying to my wife, get her out quickly. And my wife's, not like me. So she's much more being able to just approach the situation as it's fine, just pulling her out. And I look to my right and my son is like shaking and he's like fighting back tears. Now, you go back as little as a year ago, I'd have been like, this is not about you, son, right? I'd have been reacting to my body being in overwhelm and the overdrive that I'm in, right? And trying to suppress his overdrive. He's reacting to exactly the same feeling in that situation as I am, right? But as an adult, I've got this rational thing where I'm logically saying, get her out, and trying to kind of act as if I'm making the situation better, but I'm dealing with the same feeling that he's dealing with. And so instead of kind of going mad at him, what I did this time is I let him know, you're experiencing what I'm experiencing, yeah? And then I made a kind of a joke about it, yeah? And I said, look, Leah, my wife, is really, she's able to just deal with this situation like really, really like in a real calm manner. And here's me and you, and our bodies are going all crazy, and it sent our body into overdrive. And what that did is that allowed him to understand that what he was feeling and what he's experiencing wasn't wrong. It was just different to what some other people would experience. And that way he starts to recognize that I am much more of accepting of the ways that he feels then. When we become conscious of how much we need to be mindful and how much we need to be conscious as a parent, then it can have a huge impact on the relationships that we build with our children. When you look at the things that we really, really care about in our lives, we always put our most into them, if it's our work or our social lives or our pastimes. But because our families are there, they kind of love us anyway, and they're a constant. If we're not careful, we don't put the right energy and the right amount of awareness into what we're doing, and we can slide into these bad habits. And then we get into these relationships, and because the children are highlighting parts of ourselves that we don't want to have highlighted, or that we struggle with ourselves, or that we haven't yet healed, we then suppress them in them. The child then senses that and then acts accordingly to that. So we have to be really, really aware of ourselves and what we're doing. Becoming conscious around the sensitive child and understanding how when you sense their sensitivity, it touches a part of you that you're struggling with. When you do that, you give yourself the power back as a parent to be able to parent and nurture them in the way in which they need you. And the relationship changes tenfold. The day after my wife told me that I was the problem and not my son, the relationship flipped on its head. And it went from being a difficult one to one of the most amazing, in-depth, loving relationship that you could imagine in the way that it's supposed to be. But at its core, it's authentic. Because he's getting the opportunity to be who he really is, and I am loving him no matter what. And hopefully that's helping him to develop that core sense of self that he needs to do. Not based on who I need him to be or who I need him not to be, but based on who he is. So to summarize, it's all about that being conscious. Yeah, it's all about becoming mindful. It's about recognizing what part of us is struggling in the relationship rather than portraying all of the struggle onto our children. Recognize that they're sensitive, meet them where they're at. Give them the opportunity to let us know what they feel will work for them. They're small human beings, right? They're not no different from us. They're just small human beings with less experience of life, desperately trying to learn ways of dealing with and coping with the things that they're experiencing, and they're looking for us to give them their mechanisms. And if we're not careful, we pass on our unhealthy ones and we suppress the parts of them that we struggle to deal with. Become conscious, become mindful, and at the core and underlying all of that, be compassionate for who we are and understand that we won't get it right every time, but if we can get that percentage of the times that we get it right up, then we're on to a winner. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please make sure that you've liked it, and once again, as I've mentioned before, make sure that you have subscribed and that you've turned on the notifications, because there's so much more content to come, and I hope you've enjoyed this.